Imagine standing on the edge of history asking one of the simplest yet most powerful questions of all. Who discovered America? Most people immediately think of Christopher Columbus, setting sail in 1492 under the Spanish crown. But the truth is far richer, more complex, and far more fascinating than a single name or date. Welcome to this journey through U.S. history. My goal isn't just to give you a pile of dates and facts. It's to bring the past alive in a way that feels engaging, easy to follow, and deeply human. Because history isn't just about what happened, it's about why it mattered and how it still shapes our world today. In this lesson, we'll travel through time, from the very first people who crossed into the Americas thousands of years ago, to the explorers and settlers who forever changed the land, and all the way through the birth of a new nation. But everything begins with that guiding question: who really discovered America? Was it Columbus? The Vikings centuries earlier? Or should we look even further back, to the native peoples who had called this land home for millennia? That's where our story begins. Together, we'll peel back the layers, challenge the myths, and uncover the truths that shaped the foundation of America. So, if you're ready to go beyond textbooks and step into the lives, struggles, and triumphs of those who made history, stay tuned. And before we dive deeper, make sure you hit the like button, share this with someone who loves uncovering big ideas, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey. Because trust me, the real story of America is even more incredible than you think. Long before Columbus set foot on a ship, before the Vikings sailed across the Atlantic, and even before the first European maps imagined a new world, there were people here. The story of America doesn't begin in 1492. It begins almost 15,000 years ago, when the very first inhabitants crossed a land bridge called Beringia, connecting Asia to North America during the Ice Age. Imagine families bundled against the cold, following herds of mammoths and bison across frozen tundra. They weren't discovering a new world. They were simply searching for survival, carrying with them traditions, skills, and stories that would one day give rise to hundreds of unique cultures across the continent. Over time, these early settlers adapted to every kind of environment America had to offer. In the Great Plains, tribes like the Lakota became expert hunters, following vast buffalo herds. In the fertile valleys of the Southwest, the Pueblo peoples built complex irrigation systems and farmed corn, beans, and squash. Along the rivers and forests of the East, the Iroquois and Cherokee established villages, governments, and trade networks. They were hunters, gatherers, farmers, and builders. But more than that, they were creators of rich cultures and vibrant societies. They developed languages, oral histories, spiritual practices, and deep connections to the land. To them, the earth wasn't just soil, it was sacred. So when we ask, who discovered America? The truth becomes clear. America was already alive with people, communities, and civilizations long before Europeans ever arrived. Their legacy is not a footnote in history, it is the foundation of it. And this is where our story truly begins. Not with outsiders claiming discovery, but with the native peoples who lived, thrived, and shaped this land for thousands of years. If this part of history surprises you or makes you think differently about America's beginnings, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because next, we'll explore the daring journeys of the Vikings and the famous voyage of Columbus, and how their arrivals changed the course of history forever. 1,000 years ago, long before Columbus ever set sail, the icy waters of the North Atlantic carried a group of daring explorers, the Vikings. Around the year 1000 AD, led by Leif Erikson, they landed on the rocky shores of what is now Canada. They built small settlements, hunted, fished, and tried to make this wild land their home. But their colonies were short-lived. The world didn't change, not yet. The Vikings came and went, leaving only whispers and sagas and legends. Fast forward to 1492, and history would take a very different turn. An ambitious Italian sailor named Christopher Columbus convinced the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, to fund his voyage. His dream was bold, to find a faster route to Asia by sailing west. But instead of spices and silk, Columbus stumbled upon lands that Europeans had never seen before. He believed he had reached India and called the native people he met Indians. But in reality, he had landed in the Caribbean, opening the door to an entirely new era. unlike the Vikings, Columbus's voyage didn't fade into legend. It sparked a wave of European exploration and colonization that would reshape the world forever. Spain sent more ships in search of gold and glory. France turned northward, exploring Canada and trading furs. England established colonies along the east coast. Each arrival brought not just new foods, animals, and technology, but also disease, conquest, and conflict. For the native peoples, this was the beginning of a painful and complicated relationship with the newcomers. For Europe, it was the dawn of opportunity and empire, and for the world, it was the first step in the making of a nation that would one day be called the United States of America. The question isn't just who discovered America, it's whose discovery mattered most to history. The Vikings came first, but Columbus's voyage changed the world. If this story surprised you, or if you've heard the myths but never the full truth, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. In the next part of our journey, we'll dive into the very first English colony, Jamestown, and see how a tiny, struggling settlement became the seed of a new nation. The race for the New World was on. After Columbus, European nations rushed to claim land across the Americas. Spain swept south, conquering vast territories in Central and South America, seizing gold and silver and spreading their empire. But in the north, the story was different. England and France turned their eyes toward North America, where the seeds of a very different future would take root. In 1607, a group of English settlers landed in Virginia and founded Jamestown, the first permanent English colony in America. Life there was harsh. The settlers battled disease, starvation, and bitter winters. Many did not survive, but those who endured planted the foundation of what would one day grow into the United States. Just 13 years later, another group arrived with a different mission. In 1620, the Pilgrims sailed on the Mayflower, seeking freedom to practice their religion without persecution. They landed in Massachusetts, where survival again depended on resilience and cooperation. With the help of Native Americans, they endured their first brutal winter. Their shared feast of thanks became the story we now know as Thanksgiving. From these fragile beginnings, more colonies began to grow. By the 1700s, there were 13 colonies stretching along the East Coast, divided into 3 distinct regions. In New England, places like Massachusetts and Connecticut thrived on fishing, shipbuilding, and small farms. Communities were close-knit, with a strong sense of faith and cooperation. In the middle colonies, such as New York and Pennsylvania, fertile land made them the breadbasket of America, producing wheat and grain. These colonies were also rich in diversity, welcoming people of different cultures and religions. In the southern colonies like Virginia and Georgia, large plantations flourished, growing tobacco, rice, and cotton. But this wealth came at a terrible price. Enslaved Africans were forced to work the land under brutal conditions, marking one of the darkest chapters in America's story. The colonies were more than just outposts. They were experiments in survival, freedom, and community. Each region developed its own identity, yet together, they formed the roots of a new society. From these roots, a powerful question would soon rise. If they could build their own lives in America, why should they still be ruled by a king across the ocean? That question would spark a revolution. If you're enjoying this journey, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. Next, we'll uncover the growing conflict between the colonies and Britain that set the stage for America's fight for independence. Life in the early colonies was not easy. It was a daily test of endurance and determination. Families had to build their own homes, grow their own food, and face harsh winters with little more than what they could produce or trade. Disease spread quickly, and survival often depended on neighbors helping one another. For many, each day felt like a fight against nature itself. And yet, amid the struggle, there was also hope, a sense of starting fresh in a land full of opportunity. People had left crowded cities, religious persecution, and rigid class systems in Europe behind. Here in America, they dreamed of something more: freedom, land, and the chance to build a better life for their children. Agriculture became the heart of colonial life. Families tended fields growing corn, wheat, and vegetables, while others raised livestock. In some regions, farming was small and communal, with neighbors sharing resources. In the South, large plantations emerged, cultivating crops like tobacco and rice. Wealth for a few, but built on the suffering of enslaved Africans. Beyond farming, life was deeply tied to community. People came together to build churches, schools, and town halls. Religion played a powerful role. Many colonists had come specifically to escape persecution in Europe. For example, the Pilgrims and Puritans sought a place where they could worship freely, shaping New England into a region where faith guided daily life and community decisions. Children weren't just bystanders in this story. They helped in the fields, fetched water, and learned trades from their parents. Schools were rare, and only a few were able to read or write. But families believed in passing down knowledge through work, stories, and tradition. So while the colonies were full of hardship, they were also filled with promise. People endured because they believed in a future worth struggling for, a future of freedom, self-reliance, and opportunity. But not everything was peaceful. The colonies might have been across the ocean, but they were still under the rule of Britain, and the king's heavy hand was beginning to cause unrest. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, we'll explore how rising tensions with Britain, high taxes, strict laws, and a lack of representation ignited the spirit of rebellion that would soon change history forever. The colonies may have been thousands of miles away from London, but life in America was still tightly controlled by the British Crown. Every law, every tax, every decision flowed from King George III and the Parliament overseas. For the settlers, it felt unfair. They worked the land, built their homes, and created thriving communities. Yet they had no real voice in the government that ruled them. The breaking point came with taxes. Britain, drained of money after years of wars in Europe, turned to the colonies to refill its treasury. New taxes were placed on everyday items: sugar, paper, glass, and most famously, tea. For the colonists, this wasn't just about money, it was about principle. They believed in a simple but powerful idea: no taxation without representation. If they had no seat in Parliament, why should they pay taxes to it? Tensions rose with each new law. British soldiers were stationed in towns to enforce order, creating friction between colonists and the king's troops. Anger simmered in taverns, town halls, and churches. Protests grew louder, boycotts spread, and resistance became a way of life. Then, in 1773, frustration erupted into one of the most famous acts of protest in American history: the Boston Tea Party. On a cold December night, a group of colonists disguised themselves as Native Americans, boarded British ships in Boston Harbor, and hurled 342 chests of tea into the water. The salty waves turned dark as the crates split open and the crowd cheered. It was a daring, defiant act, a message to Britain that the colonies would no longer quietly obey. But the king did not take it lightly. In response, Britain cracked down harder, passing strict laws and sending more troops. Instead of silencing the colonists, these actions only fueled their determination. What had started as a dispute over taxes was now becoming something far greater: a fight for freedom, dignity, and the right to govern themselves. And so, the colonies stood on the edge of a revolution. Ordinary farmers, blacksmiths, and merchants were preparing to take on one of the most powerful empires in the world. In the next part of our story, we'll dive into the American Revolution itself, the battles, the leaders, and the bold declaration that forever changed the course of history. The year is 1775. The first shots ring out at Lexington and Concord, and suddenly, the simmering conflict between Britain and its American colonies explodes into full-scale war. Farmers with muskets and townsfolk willing to risk everything now stood against the world's most powerful empire. The American Revolution had begun. Just 1 year later, in 1776, a bold and daring step was taken. Representatives from the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia, and under the pen of Thomas Jefferson, they drafted a document unlike any the world had ever seen: the Declaration of Independence. With its powerful words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal," the colonies declared they would no longer be subjects of the British Crown. They were now free and independent states. Signing this declaration was an act of courage and treason in the eyes of Britain. Each signer knew they risked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. Leading the charge on the battlefield was George Washington, the man chosen to command the Continental Army. It was far from an easy task. Washington's troops were poorly supplied, often hungry, and sometimes barefoot in the snow. Yet what they lacked in resources, they made up for with determination and an unshakable belief in their cause. The turning point came when the colonists gained a powerful ally, France. Inspired by the colonists' bravery and eager to weaken Britain, France sent soldiers, ships, and supplies. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted. In 1781, the decisive moment arrived at the Battle of Yorktown. With French ships blocking the harbor and American troops surrounding the British, General Cornwallis was forced to surrender. The victory was electrifying. The war, which had once seemed impossible to win, was now within reach. Finally, in 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States of America. Against all odds, the colonies had broken free. The Revolution was more than just a war. It was the birth of a nation founded on ideals of liberty, self-determination, and the belief that ordinary people could govern themselves. The world watched in amazement as a new chapter in history began, and this was only the beginning. With independence secured, the next great challenge lay ahead. How do you build a new country from scratch? The revolution was over, but the real test had only just begun. How do you build a brand new nation? The colonies, now independent states, faced chaos, debt, and the question of unity. The first attempt, the Articles of Confederation, proved too weak. There was no strong central authority, and the young country risked falling apart. So, in 1787, leaders gathered in Philadelphia once again, not to rebel this time, but to design a government that could last. The result was the U.S. Constitution, a bold framework built on principles of checks and balances, separation of powers, and the idea that the people themselves were the ultimate authority. It wasn't perfect, but it created the foundation for democracy in America. 2 years later, in 1789, the nation elected its very first president, George Washington. Revered as the hero of the Revolution, Washington set the tone for leadership with humility and a deep sense of responsibility. He refused to act like a king, showing the world that America was committed to something new, a republic of laws, not monarchs. Yet even in this new land of freedom, contradictions remained. Slavery continued, with millions of African Americans denied liberty. Women were largely excluded from political life, and Native Americans faced displacement from their ancestral lands. The ideals of the Revolution, liberty and equality, were real, but they were not yet for everyone. This was the birth of the United States, a nation of great promise and painful contradictions, striving toward ideals it had not yet fully lived up to. The Constitution gave America its structure, but the struggle for true equality was far from over. And so, the story continued. As the nation grew, new conflicts, challenges, and opportunities would shape its destiny. The young United States was hungry to grow, and in 1803, an opportunity too big to ignore arrived. President Thomas Jefferson struck a deal with France known as the Louisiana Purchase. For just $15 million, the nation doubled its size overnight, gaining vast lands stretching from the Mississippi River all the way to the Rocky Mountains. But buying the land was just the beginning. To truly understand what lay in this new territory, Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on a daring expedition. With the invaluable guidance of Sacagawea, a Shoshone woman, they mapped rivers, cataloged plants and animals, and forged relationships with native tribes. Their journey became legendary, a symbol of curiosity, courage, and the boundless promise of the American frontier. This period also gave rise to a powerful idea: manifest destiny, the belief that it was America's destiny, even its duty, to spread westward across the continent. Settlers packed up their wagons, chasing land, opportunity, and the dream of a better life. But that dream came with a cost. As the United States pushed west, Native American communities were displaced, their lands taken, their cultures threatened. Expansion wasn't just about opportunity, it was also about conflict, broken treaties, and deep injustices that would echo through history. Westward expansion defined America's spirit: bold, ambitious, and forward-looking, but it also exposed the painful contradictions of progress. As America expanded, so too did its deepest wound, slavery. In the South, vast plantations of cotton and tobacco depended on the forced labor of enslaved Africans, whose lives were marked by unimaginable suffering, family separations, and a denial of the most basic human rights. Meanwhile, the North was changing. Industrial growth and urban life meant slavery was far less central, and more voices began rising in opposition. Brave abolitionists risked everything to fight this injustice. Harriet Tubman, once enslaved herself, became the Moses of her people, guiding hundreds to freedom through the Underground Railroad. Frederick Douglass, a powerful writer and orator, used his own story to expose the cruelty of slavery and call for its end. And when Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, her words lit a fire across the nation, forcing millions to confront the human cost of bondage. But these voices of freedom also deepened the divide. The North and South no longer just differed in economy or culture. They clashed on the very question of morality and human dignity. Could a nation built on liberty continue to tolerate slavery? This growing tension pushed America closer and closer to breaking point. A storm was coming, one that would tear the nation apart and reshape its destiny forever. The storm finally broke in 1861. The United States split in two, the Union in the North and the Confederacy in the South, and the issue at the very heart of it was slavery. For 4 brutal years, brother fought brother in the Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in American history. In the midst of this struggle, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. It didn't free every enslaved person immediately, but it transformed the war into a fight for freedom itself, giving hope to millions and striking a moral blow against slavery. By 1865, the Union triumphed. The 13th Amendment was passed, abolishing slavery once and for all. The dream of liberty seemed closer than ever. Soon after, the 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law, while the 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. But freedom on paper did not mean freedom in reality. The Reconstruction era was met with fierce resistance in the South. New laws, Jim Crow laws, emerged to enforce segregation and strip African Americans of the very rights they had just been promised. Violence and intimidation kept inequality alive. The Civil War ended slavery, but the struggle for true equality was only beginning. The promise of Reconstruction flickered, but for many, it was quickly overshadowed by a new era of racial injustice that would haunt America for generations. By the late 1800s, America was transforming at lightning speed. The Industrial Revolution turned the nation into a powerhouse of innovation and industry. Factories rose in booming cities, steel built the bridges and skyscrapers that defined skylines, and inventions like Thomas Edison's electric light bulb and Alexander Graham Bell's telephone changed everyday life forever. At the same time, millions of people from around the world poured into the United States, passing through Ellis Island in New York Harbor. They came seeking opportunity, freedom, and a new start. These immigrants fueled the workforce that powered America's rapid growth, but their journey wasn't easy. They often faced prejudice, poverty, and brutal working conditions. Factories demanded long hours and unsafe conditions, and tragedies like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 shocked the nation, sparking the rise of labor unions and calls for safety reforms. Workers demanded dignity, and slowly, laws began to change. Meanwhile, on the western frontier, Native American nations continued to resist U.S. expansion. Leaders like Sitting Bull stood against the loss of their lands and culture, leading to famous battles such as Little Bighorn. But despite their courage, Native communities suffered devastating losses as the government pushed its policy of westward settlement. This was an era of progress and pain, innovation that reshaped the world, fueled by human labor and sacrifice alongside the tragic displacement of Native peoples. America was rising, but not without deep costs. At the dawn of the 20th century, America was no longer just a young nation. It was stepping onto the world stage. In 1898, the Spanish-American War marked a turning point. With victory, the United States gained overseas territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, signaling its arrival as an emerging global power. That role grew even clearer in World War I. Though hesitant at first, the U.S. entered the conflict in 1917, tipping the balance toward victory for the Allies. The war showed that America's influence reached far beyond its borders. After the fighting, the nation entered a period of dazzling change, the Roaring Twenties. Cities lit up with jazz, speakeasies, and a new spirit of freedom. For the first time, women won the right to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. It was a decade of prosperity, cultural explosion, and bold optimism. But then came the crash. In 1929, the stock market collapsed, and the country spiraled into the Great Depression. Banks failed, jobs vanished, and millions of families lined up at soup kitchens. Poverty and despair spread like wildfire. Out of this crisis rose Franklin D. Roosevelt with his New Deal. Through bold programs of relief, reform, and recovery, he offered hope to the struggling nation. From Social Security to public works projects, the New Deal began reshaping the relationship between the government and its people. This era revealed both sides of America, the heights of prosperity and cultural innovation, and the depths of economic despair. But through it all, resilience remained at the heart of the nation's story. December 7, 1941, a date etched in history. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and overnight the United States was thrust into World War II. What followed was a massive mobilization. Factories shifted to war production, women filled the workforce, and soldiers fought across Europe and the Pacific. In 1944, the Allies launched D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history, storming the beaches of Normandy to push back Nazi Germany. By 1945, victory was within reach. In Europe, Hitler's regime collapsed. In the Pacific, the war ended after the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A devastating decision that ended the conflict, but left the world forever changed. When the dust settled, the United States emerged not just victorious, but as a global superpower. Yet victory soon gave way to tension. The Soviet Union, once an ally, became a rival. Thus began the Cold War, a decades-long standoff of ideology, influence, and fear. The US and USSR battled not on open fields, but in proxy wars, nuclear buildups, and the race to space. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear disaster, while the Berlin Wall stood as a stark symbol of a divided world. At the same time, the space race pushed human achievement higher, culminating with Americans landing on the moon in 1969. This era defined America's role as a leader and protector on the world stage. But it also meant living under the constant shadow of nuclear weapons, where a single misstep could change everything. The story of modern America is one of both triumph and unfinished work. In the 1950s and 60s, the nation faced its greatest moral test, the Civil Rights Movement. Ordinary people, led by extraordinary voices like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, rose up against segregation and injustice. Through peaceful protest and unshakable courage, they pushed the nation forward, leading to landmark victories like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These laws didn't end racism, but they cracked open doors of opportunity and equality that had long been shut. As decades passed, America's influence only grew. Its economy became the largest in the world, fueled by technology companies that reshaped how we live, work, and connect. Its military projected power across the globe, while its culture, Hollywood films, music, food, and fashion, captured imaginations everywhere. America wasn't just a country, it was a symbol. But progress has never come without challenges. Racism and inequality still wound communities. Healthcare, political division, and environmental crises weigh heavily on the nation's conscience. The very freedom that makes America strong also fuels passionate debates over its future. Yet through every test, America's strengths shine: freedom, diversity, resilience, and innovation. Time and again, the nation has stumbled but risen, reinventing itself with each generation. And that's the truth. America's story is still being written. Its future rests on dreams not yet realized, on courage yet to be shown, and on the possibility that tomorrow can be better than today. So as we close this journey through history, remember, the story of America isn't just about the past, it's about you, me, and what we choose to build next. If this exploration inspired you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that shape our world, because history is never finished, and neither are we.